That Luke passage that we just heard is commonly referred to as the blessings and woes. And Father Richard Rohr explains it this way. Jesus is giving us an upside-down reality, turning our own morality on its head, to live, at least a bit of the time, in dissatisfaction, which is the human condition anyway. We live that way so that we long for God, the one thing that alone will satisfy us. End of quote. This is a Tazy chant. You might know it. In God alone my soul can find rest and peace. In God my peace and joy. Only in God my soul can find its rest and peace. In God alone my soul can find rest and peace. In God my peace and joy. Only in God my soul can find its rest and peace. Now, the book of Matthew has the same teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, and we'll look at that shortly. But before we do, I want to say that these Beatitudes and blessings and woes are the very first thing that Jesus teaches the 12. In the story, we are told that he's just gathered the disciples, and this is the very first thing he teaches them. And it begs the question, why is this of primary importance? Well, there's no greater teacher on love than losing love. There's no wiser guide on compassion than hurting someone you care about and watching them get crushed. These gut-wrenching emotions cut through everything. And when you meet somebody in a situation like that, the driver who's accidentally hit a child, or the young mother whose husband has died, the only response is, I am so, so sorry. You do not wish suffering on anyone. That's not what Jesus is saying. And it's folly to go looking for suffering and glorify it. But likewise, it is folly to prioritize comfort and ease over what is true and right. Now, one of my heroes was Peace Pilgrim, and she would say again and again, stop prioritizing your comfort. That this quality sets our standards too low. In a documentary once, I heard her say, me sleeping under a bridge, sheltering for the snow for the night, is nothing compared to the value of nuclear disarmament and world peace. Now, Peace Pilgrim, in case you didn't know, she walked until given shelter and fasted until given food. She did this for almost 3 decades. And she didn't own anything, not even her name. She was just called Peace. She had the clothing that she wore, and that was it. A remarkable human being. Now, today I don't want to glorify suffering. I want to say that again. But I also don't want to bypass the very real call for us to address injustice and alleviate suffering wherever we can. That is very, very important. Please do not get me wrong. I'm not saying let's not attend to that. And I agree with Peace Pilgrim that we need to get our priorities right. And neither comfort nor hoarding wealth for the future should be highest on the list. Mythologically, we are the children of Adam and Eve. And in the story, once they ate the apple, something shifted. We changed. Perhaps it was the birth of language, or whatever that knowledge of good and evil was. We humans left Eden and came here on this earth plane where we toil and sweat and suffer and pain, like the pain and danger of childbirth. All these things happen. There are difficulties here. Life in these human suits can be hard, and you might have noticed that suffering happens everywhere. Those Buddhists are on to something. Eventually, we all experience suffering. There's no way of getting away from it. And to make things harder, it's not dished out fairly. Some people get a much easier go in life, and it's not because they're better, kinder people. In fact, sometimes the kindest people have extremely difficult lives. Right, my point is in saying all this is that we do not live in Eden, we live on earth. But Jesus teaches us that heaven is also here with us in our lives. Bidden or not, God is present, very present, closer than breathing and nearer than our hands and feet. I want to go back to the psalm. Now, this was the one that was chosen to go first. Tim, I know you read it really well, but this is a different interpretation. This one's by Nancy Merrill. So in the collection of psalms, they chose this one to go first because it was of primary importance. Blessed are those who walk hand in hand with goodness, who stand beside virtue, who sit in the seat of truth. For their delight is in the spirit of love, and in love's heart they dwell day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water that yield fruit in due season, and their leaves flourish. And in all that they do, they give life. The unloving are not so. They are like dandelions, which the wind blows away. Turning from the heart of love, they will know suffering and pain. They will be isolated from wisdom. For love knows the way of truth. The way of ignorance will perish, and love's penetrating light breaks through hearts filled with illusions. Forgiveness is the way. Nancy Merrill has this lovely book to accompany the Psalms. She rewrote them, interpreted them. She was a Quaker. I like hers very much. Now, I think that this truth that Psalm 1 talks about is actually written onto our hearts. And as I look at the news and ponder how bad is this going to get, I return to the Psalm. Because it says, regardless of what happens, God's goodness is planted more deeply and eternally than all that is wrong. But things go wrong. Empires and regimes gain control and persecute certain populations. In Jesus' day, it was the Romans, and he and his people were the ones being persecuted. This is who Jesus is talking to in the Beatitudes and the blessings and woes. So let's think about that, the readings that we just heard, from that perspective. How do we make sense of God's redemption and goodness when evil exists? And the powerful who control your lives despise you. I mean, that was the case for the Jews. Things are hard, and you are vulnerable to attack at any moment. That's the lens with which we should look at the Beatitudes. And here's an aside. It's an important aside, so I'm going to include it. A huge problem, I think, of Western Christianity is that it has flourished among the top dogs. It's flourished amongst the rich and powerful, and as a result, some of the message has been distorted. For example, if you tell people, this is the truth and it will set you free. This teaching is gospel. Gospel meaning infallible and right. This can make believers inflexible and self-righteous. And this goes for the left as well as the right. This is not a political thing. This is to do with privilege. When rather, we must be humble and open to God appearing in the stranger's guise, ever new. Matthew 25 here. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Or Micah 6. God requires us to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Our privileged egos can be a huge problem. And here, when I'm using the word ego, I'm talking about that thinking separate self that has a name, perhaps a husband, these kids, a mortgage, it likes this kind of milk, but not this kind of milk. This is the ego. And the ego is needed, and it works hard to create a good life and a good self-image for ourselves. But if adversity or therapy isn't there to rub up against the ego, too often the ego gets inflated and takes up more and more space, puffing itself up above others. Now, what Jesus is doing with these Beatitudes is snow plowing a way forward for us right to where that tree is planted by the stream in Psalm 1. So let's look at the Beatitudes and the blessings and woes. I've got them in video form for us here. This is a video made by the Work of the People. It's about 2.5 minutes long for us to think about this deeply. So as I said, Jesus is snow plowing a way for us right to the tree planted by the stream in Psalm 1. And he does this by calling out the corruption, or if you like, distraction that the material wealth and privilege can sideroad us into. And instead, he's goading us actually to go out into the wilderness where everything is raw and insecure and open. And at first, this might seem like a strange path to choose. Why would anybody want to choose a path where they're going to suffer? And modern Christianity really has moved away from that medieval glorification of asceticism. We place little importance on deliberate acts of suffering as a shortcut to holiness. And I think that that's a good thing. There's already enough suffering without us deliberately creating more of it. I think Jesus was pointing to something very different than martyrdom and asceticism. The first thing I see him pointing at is you cannot serve two masters. You cannot pursue ego ambition and a material wealth for yourself if you want unitive consciousness. There's no separate I in Jesus' worldview. So if you hoard and protect for yourself, you're actually stepping outside of the we, the us. Or in other words, you're cutting yourself off from the web of life where Grace flows in abundance. And secondly, I see Jesus pointing here towards the fact that heaven touches us when we need it. Remember the situation that he and his disciples were in. Grace is poured out on those who are in real need. I can tell you that of the thousands of people I have worked with and counseled over the years, the ones who experienced the presence of God most profoundly were not middle-class, comfortable, privileged people. The people who told me about Christ sitting on the bed beside them, creating an indent on the mattress, or something pulling them up above the waves so that they could breathe when they were drowning. These were asylum seekers and neglected children. They were people for whom danger had been a reality. They were people who'd come through very difficult circumstance. And as a result, they viscerally knew God in a way that everyone else just talked about. I was quite astonished by it when I started hearing these stories. I really believe that God is especially present with those who are most vulnerable. And God is closest to us in our lives when we are most vulnerable, when we are suffering. So I want us to think about this. I'm going to put these blessings and beatitudes on the screen. Let me find it. Where is it? As you look at these in your own life, can you think about any of these that have been true for you or somebody you know? This is a difficult question, so I'm going to give you an example, right? Here is Richard Rohr talking about one of them.
And then, again, talk about upside-down universe. How happy are you when people hate you? What? I'm not happy when, and a lot of people do hate me. I get hate letters every day. When they exclude you and insult you and denounce your name as evil. Why should I be happy? Well, because then you have to find your happiness somewhere else than in other people's opinion of you. I hope some of you like me, but I can't base my happiness on whether you like me. That's called codependency now. You know, it's just up and down. You take the temperature. Who likes me today? Don't do that. If you want to build your personality, your life, on a solid foundation, base it on one who loves you unconditionally, constantly, and without exception. Then you don't go up and down. You know who you are. You know who you are forever.
In God alone my soul can find rest and peace. In God my peace and joy. Only in God my soul can find its rest and peace. All right, so let's go back. Here's these, and I'm going to play guitar and noodle in the background for a minute, and if you've got pen and paper, you might want to journal here, but I'm interested. Can you think of situations where it was really true that blessed are those who weep? Blessed are the pure in heart. Some of them are easier than others, but I'm going to ask you to type that in the chat. So for a minute, I will stop talking and play guitar and let you think about real life examples of whether these have borne true or not. One more minute. I've got the Neil Douglas Clutch's Prayers of the Cosmos in front of me, and he has some rewording of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the merciful. Aligned with the one are the compassionate. Upon them shall be compassion. Or he rephrases it this way: healthy are those who extend grace. They shall find their own prayers answered. And here's my favourite one. This one has brought me great solace. I'll show you the book for just a second here. Neil Douglas Clutch, Prayers of the Cosmos. He's looking at the Aramaic of the Beatitudes. This is, blessed are those who mourn. Healed are those who weep for their frustrated desire. They shall see the face of fulfillment in a new form. I reframe that to be this: healed are those who grieve and weep for their loss. They shall see love's face in a new form. Got some in the chat here. Gary says, I heard a young woman 6 months sober speaking last night of her recent recovery. She was radiant. Oh, I love that. Yes, 12 steps is such, well, it doesn't just have to be 12 steps, but it's such a profound path. Karen writes, Olga, a survivor of sexual gender-based, politically motivated violence, who walked many miles on foot to participate in a woman's hearing on the East Timorese Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and became a beacon of truth-telling. Yeah. Here's the thing. The healing that is offered becomes a blessing to others. If you have any other insights, pop them in the chat and I'll look at them later. And of course there's Leonard Cohen, who says there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So if I bring this towards a close in the summary. Last night, as I was sitting with the blessings and woes, pondering this very difficult upside down reality, an image popped into my mind. Now my images are sometimes very playful, and this one was of Jesus driving the town's giant snowplow and creating a path through which all that we could get through, all that was wrong around us. Now this is a very silly image, but it prompted me to realize that the Beatitudes could be understood as saying this: come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. Matthew 11:28-30. Christ has created a sacred path for us to follow. When we align with love, we are tapping into the heartbeat of the sacred universe, and life force comes into us. Grace reaches out through our hands, and circumstance become pregnant with possibilities of reconciliation and peace, just like Karen talked about with Olga, that survivor of sexual and political violence. We're not abandoned to live out the consequences of our collective choices on an alien planet. Yes, there's suffering here. Yes, there is. The Adam and Eve story was written for a reason. But the earth was made beautiful and good from the very beginning. And God never turns her back on what she has created. One of my favourite teachers, mystical teachers, was Julian of Norwich. And in her near-death experience, when she almost died and met Christ and he loved her and taught her things, one of the things that he showed her was a small thing in the palm of her hand about the size of a hazelnut. And she looked at it and Christ told her, it lasts forever. That this is all that has been made. This is the world. And this is the words that Christ said. It lasts and ever shall, for God loves it. And so have all the things, beginning in the love of God. First, God made it. Second, God loves it. And third, God keeps it. Forgive me for my clumsy use of language here, but what she is saying is that we're not abandoned to live out our collective choices and all the difficulties without God's Trinitarian relational presence in and among us. Thank you for listening. I'd like to close the sermon with this prayer by Teresa of Avila, translated by Mirror by Star. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes. God alone is unchanging. Whoever has God lacks nothing. With patience all things are possible. God alone is enough. Amen.